Winnie Nomzamo Madikizela-Mandela married a man who would become the world's most famous political prisoner. She herself would become the mother of the nation, a title tarnished just months before Nelson Mandela was freed in 1990. Born in 1936 as a black woman in a country shackled by racial discrimination and poverty, she was further disadvantaged by being born into a rural African patriarchy that dominated her village, Mbongweni, Bizana, in the Eastern Cape area of South Africa, once known as Pondoland.
We are here today to tell you that that day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom. Amandla! Amandla!
Izwa imithandazo yethu Nkosi sikelela.
The fourth of 8 children, Winnie's father worked for the government and her mother was a teacher, but died when she was only 8 years old. Winnie completed her social work degree and turned down a scholarship to the United States. She was exposed to the appalling social conditions of black people in the worker dormitories called townships that surrounded the white cities.
I dealt mostly with children. I dealt with hunger, with poverty directly. And the fact that there was no way of changing those conditions other than changing the whole status quo.
Politicized by her work, Winnie got involved in the African National Congress, or ANC, a progressive organization struggling to improve black living conditions and fighting for their basic human rights. In the early 1950s, the ANC ran a civil disobedience campaign in which people burned the hated passbooks that controlled their movements. Shortly afterwards, Nelson Mandela was arrested with 155 others and charged with high treason. The trial took 5 years, and funds had to be raised for their defense.
Everybody was talking about this man. I was at work at Baragwanath Hospital, and I got a call from a man who introduced himself over the phone as Nelson Mandela. He said he wanted to see me and discuss certain issues with me. I was petrified. I was so shocked at receiving that call. I wondered what I'd... Then on the appointed day we met, and it transpired he wanted me to help raise funds for the then treason trial. That is how I met my husband.
After a whirlwind romance, they were married on 19th June 1958 in a Methodist service in the Transkei area. Winnie settled in Mandela's home in Soweto at 8115 Orlando West. Nelson continued his political work, and they spent very little time together.
Winnie walilwela ilungelo lakhe. 2 asibonanga lutho lubi alwenza athi njengami yabo.
So there was demonstrations and people were arrested and filled the jails. And Winnie was one of those people that were arrested. She was expectant with her first child at that time, and even in that state she went to jail.
Life I've led from that moment, always been in and out of prisons. I can no longer even remember how many times I've been arrested and how many times I've been actually jailed. There have been too many.
During the 5 long years of the treason trial, Winnie brought up their 2 children, Zenani, born in 1959, and Zinzi, born in 1960, and kept the home fires burning. Mandela was found guilty of sabotage and sentenced to life imprisonment on the dreaded prison on Robben Island. But Winnie would not hold him in her arms for another 10 years.
Part of my soul did go with him.
As the wife of a dangerous political prisoner, the apartheid regime subjected Winnie to a series of harsh legal orders and harassment that became a hallmark of her life. The feared security police watched her constantly. She was not allowed to receive visitors, be quoted, or socialize. But Winnie challenged every order, worked clandestinely for the ANC.
We were very young then, and my mother tried getting us into schools in Soweto. And the black principals then were very scared of police harassment. They were afraid to take us because 1 or 2 had already experienced, harassment from the security police for having us there. Then we had to use, we changed our surnames, and my mother took us to, a colored school in town. And there as well, the security police caught up with us and, had us kicked out of that school. And this went on and on in about 6 or 7 schools here in South Africa, in town, where we were just chucked out. We wouldn't even spend a month, we'd be kicked out, until such time that some friends of my mother's heard about our plight, and then they offered to have us educated in Swaziland.
In 1969, she was detained without trial in solitary confinement for 16 months under the Notorious Terrorism Act in Pretoria Central Prison.
The cell in which I was held at the beginning was so small that if I stretched my hands, I touched both walls. I could barely exercise. I was interrupted right through, day and night, for 7 days and 7 nights. As they changed the teams, Sonnypool would rub his hands and say he is waiting for that moment when they shall break me completely. On the 7th day, I started urinating blood, and the body was swollen like a balloon. They never switched off the light. I had this floodlight night and day. I lost track of time.
She was released in October 1969 after 491 days in solitary confinement without being charged. She was banned for 5 years and placed under house arrest. In 1971, a gunman was seen prowling the yard of her Soweto home. The following year, 2 men tried to strangle her in her bed, but her screams attracted neighbors and the men fled.
But what I went through, that personal experience, hardened me so much. The security branch had made me the soldier at heart I am today.
I think it's very difficult for people on the outside to fully appreciate the kind of experience that Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela went through during her own journey from the early 1960s.
I knew then that somehow there had to be a political crisis in this country for us to reach the ultimate goal.
The government blamed Winnie for the June 1976 youth uprising and banished her to a small farming town called Brantford. The house in Brantford had a bare earthen floor, and she only had a small coal stove as winter approached. Her fridge was housed at the police station because there was no electricity. She had to fetch water down the street in a bucket and heat it herself. She could not speak the local languages. The police watched her day and night.
The government's own version of a prison without walls, a prison outside prison. I engaged myself heavily in numerous projects for the community. In a way, it became a livable prison, which was a point of departure for me to serve my people where I had been placed without any choice.
Winnie challenged racist attitudes in town, shopped in white shops, and disregarded her restrictions. She began a clinic, a soup kitchen, and initiated vegetable garden projects. She looked so brave, but really, she was traumatized.
So she gets there, and she revolutionizes the whole place. And she enters the shops where normally black people are not allowed to go. With the result that Afrikaners in Brantford wanted her to be moved from Brantford as a place of banishment to be taken to another place, because they were saying that since Winnie came to Brantford, the Kaffers were very shifty. And of course, the other people, seeing the way she's fighting the system and the oppression, they start taking it from her, it becomes infectious.
By 1985, unrest was spreading throughout the country, and the government declared a state of emergency. There were running battles in the townships of Brantford. Amid the harassment, arrests and detentions, Winnie had to apply to the minister for permission every single time to visit her husband on Robben Island. In the beginning, she could only visit every 2 years, but later more visits were allowed. After his daughter Zenani married a Swazi prince, she was allowed to visit him in jail. It was the first time in 14 years that Nelson had physical contact with a member of his family.
Throughout the years, visits to him have been a tremendous source of inspiration. The most painful experiences is to give the prison your back and return back home, knowing fully well that you are leaving him there for life, as far as those who have jailed him think.
While she was away, the security police raided her house and later firebombed it and burned it down.
When she came back into the community, she generated an enormous amount of energy, and there was enormous popularity around the iconic figure that she had developed into during the period of her husband's incarceration. Those youth coalesced around Mrs. Mandela and became known as the Mandela United Football Club. Didn't really play much football, but were engaged largely as a bodyguard for Miss Madikizela-Mandela, but also took on the role of a disciplinary role that enforced discipline on the local communities.
As the struggle against apartheid intensified, the stakes became higher. Winnie began to address rallies, her language increasingly militant.
Pretoria has failed to rule our country.
Bua Mandela! Bua!
Bua! We are here as testimony to the fact that the solution to this country's problems lies in these black hands. We are here today to tell you that that day is not far when we shall lead you to freedom. Amandla!
Shortly afterwards, on 13th April 1986, she made another speech in Munseyville Township, where she advocated the practice of necklace, which used petrol and car tires to burn people alive. She told the crowd, "With our boxes of matches and our necklaces, we shall liberate this country." But the undisciplined violence emerging from the Mandela United Football Club was drawing unwelcome attention.
Where we have this period which we call the sort of 4 months of madness between November 1988 and February 1989, where a number of people were killed by football club members, including the famous Stompie Sepe case. And it was these cases that formed the focus of the TRC investigation. In that context, become a law unto themselves, imposing discipline and punishment, which included torture, kidnappings, and murder during this period. And of course, this created enormous tension with community bodies who felt that the Mandela United Football Club and Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela were unaccountable.
On the 10th of February 1990, President F.W. de Klerk announced that Nelson Mandela would be freed unconditionally and the ANC and other political movements would be unbanned.
This was the moment the world paused to applaud. The day the myth yielded.
The next day, with Winnie at his side, Nelson Mandela walked free and led the country to political liberation.
Measured and deliberate, betraying only the hesitation that comes of a man thrust into the spotlight again after 27 years.
On 27th of April 1994, the ANC won the first non-racial general election. And on 10th of May 1994, Nelson Mandela became the first black president of the Republic of South Africa. Although Nelson had separated from Winnie 2 years earlier, after it was revealed that she had been unfaithful to him during his imprisonment.
Why would I order the burning of...
The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was tasked with opening up the festering wounds of apartheid and uncovering its secrets. Part of this involved the actions of the Mandela United Football Club in the late 1980s.
The experience was quite surreal. Ms. Madikizela-Mandela always has this remarkable public image of being impeccably dressed, hiding behind dark shades. You didn't get a sense that you were talking to a human being, a person, per se, that she had a wall around her which was impossible to penetrate. This was not something that she had developed because of the Truth Commission, but perhaps over her many, many years of experience of surviving in a hostile environment.
If so, raise your right hand and say, "So help me God."
So help me God.
Thank you. You may be seated.
On the last day of the hearing, the TRC chairperson, Nobel Peace Prize winner Archbishop Desmond Tutu, appealed to her to apologize.
I acknowledge Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela's role in the history of our struggle. And yet, one has to say that something went wrong. Horribly, badly wrong. Many, many love you. Many, many say you should have been where you ought to be. People out there who want to embrace you. I still embrace you because I love you. And I love you very deeply. I beg you. I beg you. Please. You are a great person. And you don't know how your greatness would be enhanced if you were to say sorry, things went wrong, forgive me. I beg you.
I will take this opportunity to say to the family of Dr. Aswat how deeply sorry I am, and to Stompy's mother how deeply sorry I am. I have said so to her before a few years back when the heat was very hot. I am saying it is true. Things went horribly wrong. I fully agree with that. And for that part of those painful years when things went horribly wrong and we were aware of the fact that there were factors that led to that, for that I am deeply sorry.
I think that the fact that Mrs. Madikizela-Mandela didn't end up in some kind of institution is perhaps a remarkable reflection of her own strengths at one level.
On 24th of April 2003, 7 years after her apology to the TRC, Winnie was found guilty on 43 counts of fraud and 25 of theft relating to an ANC pension fund. She was sentenced to 5 years jail, resigned all her ANC positions, and on appeal got a suspended sentence after showing she did not personally benefit from the fraud and theft. Despite her growing list of criminal convictions, she remains very popular within the ANC and has continued to voice the grievances of the marginalized, poor, and downtrodden. In 2013, she published her memoirs of her 491 days in detention, spoke out against the treatment of her frail former husband in hospital, and gave few interviews. Winnie continues to seize the imagination of the nation, either revered as the mother of the nation or as a criminal guilty of crimes against children and the struggle. Neither view is entirely correct, and the complexities of this iconic and damaged public person continue to elude both South Africans and the world.
What I can say about Winnie, she's a brave woman. What I like about her, yeah, she was a brave woman. Yeah, with a lot of guts.
Winnie Mandela Rulanis, Katola Kulobuta, Arlonella, Hawaneli don't pass, Retradi Passahante, Kilebu Kulobote, Ribe Freedom, Lebanaba Runaba, Tole, Babale, Hantleba Tole Tuto and
Kuluma very strong. Kule 27 years, Utata Ehleli, Uwenzile konke. But uzowamlinda asangabe no baby asangabe na next utata umshiya nabantwana bayithu bakhe umthola lokana nabantwana bayithu bakhe.
President Mandela, viva! Viva President Jacob Zuma, viva! Amandla! Extremely happy about it, and I was glad I refused to read the script, and I refused to be told in advance what was going to be portrayed of me. because I wanted it as an honest evaluation of the journey we have traveled.
I applaud them for being brave enough to bring out both positive and negative opinions of her. I applaud them for making it in such a way that it doesn't matter which side you fall on, you have something that brings you in. You have something that brings you closer.
It was a very emotional rendition of a story that, growing up in white apartheid South Africa, was a very different portrayal. And you understand, I now understand both sides of a story on a different level.